Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very excited for this particular webinar because in the past year we've been doing a lot of work on community resilience and kind of looking on how individuals find their place in society. And one of the key things that keeps coming up is media engagement and the roles that individuals and communities have with media, especially because media has a huge influence on the way people think, the way stereotypes are transmitted, and so on. So tonight we have a recent graduate from the University of Western Ontario in the journalism program, Sumaya Tauba, who we had the chance to work with her in London's workshop, and the feedback was amazing, and the tools and the knowledge that we got out of her own experience and the stories she shared was so beneficial that we thought, hey, let's bring this to a national level. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you all Sumaya Tauba.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to my parents' home. It's it's nice. I'm really excited to be sharing this because I did have a lot of fun doing it in London. And this past year, doing my master's in journalism was a crazy, hectic experience. And so I'm excited to be sharing the kind of things that I learned. So just to kind of kick off this webinar, a little bit about me. Like Stefan said, I'm a recent graduate of the program. I'm Egyptian, but I've kind of grown up all over the place. And most importantly, I'm not an expert in media just yet. Inshallah, I'll get there in some point in time. But for now, I'm just kind of splashing around, trying to figure out my own way. But I have really tried to focus a little bit on media representation of minorities over this past year. It's something that obviously, as a visible minority myself, it's something that I really concerns me. And so, yeah, I hope the things that I share tonight are valuable and that you guys can implement them later. So to kick off, I'll share a little bit of a story, and I share a lot of stories, so sorry about that. But one of my goals for my final semester in school was to kind of focus specifically on minority communities in London, Ontario, because I felt like that was something that wasn't ever really talked about. So I made a really big effort to talk about Black Canadians, to talk about the Indigenous community. I did a little bit about the Muslim community, but I kind of wanted to go outside of my comfort zone, so I didn't really want to focus on that so much. And people were really curious. Like, I was getting a lot of applause, a lot of like, good job, Sumaya, but people kept asking me, like, what are you trying to prove? What are you trying to do? Like, why can't you just do a story on, like, I don't know, like puppies in the park? Do something happy, do something light. And I guess I'd have to say that the reason that I did this was because I have personally seen the impact of negative images in the media constantly, and what that does to young people especially. So if you're a young, like, Muslim woman and you're growing up in London, Ontario, and all you see are these constant images of people who look like you or have names like you, and the only thing that they're ever doing is, you know, being called a terrorist or, you know, driving a cab in a TV show, that does start to have an impact on you and your self-esteem, even subconsciously. And you start to believe that you are, in fact, less than the rest of society. And that troubles me because, like, I feel like, alhamdulillah, I try to critically analyze everything around me, but I have a younger sister and I have a younger brother, and I'm concerned about the society that they grow up in. So I want to make sure that young people and young people of color know that there's more to them than what their society tells them. And so that's something that I really tried to focus on. So I guess to start off, how would you say minorities are shown in the media today? Just off the top of my head, I was brainstorming a couple of adjectives that I would say, and I would say minorities are shown as evil or backwards, or a threat to Canadian value is something that we see a lot these days. Or on the flip side, we're the victims, we're helpless, we always need to be saved or educated. But all in all, I would definitely categorize the minority as the other. Although Canada as a country is formed of so many immigrants from so many different countries and cultures and backgrounds, I don't really know what a Canadian value is. You know, how do you define that? And so I began to look critically at how minorities were being covered, and then also at the same time, I wanted to talk about how many minorities are in the newsroom? How many people of visible minorities can be seen behind the computer? Are the ones writing the stories the one pitching the stories? And again, not that many. I mean, I had a professor say that most Canadian newsrooms are run by straight white men. And because of that, that's how the narratives always come out. You're always given the perspective of the straight white man. That's always the person telling your story. So as a young Muslim woman, stories about the Muslim world or about my community are being told from a perspective that's not mine, that doesn't represent what I think and how I feel. And again, that's extremely frustrating. So I understand that. That's part of the reason that I wanted to go into journalism in the first place. So I guess, where do we go from there? We're all frustrated, we're all annoyed, you know, people are writing and telling our stories and they're not talking to us, we're not being represented properly, so what can we do about it? So here's the first part. We have to know what's going on. We have to be engaged and we have to kind of see what is being said about us so that we can defend ourselves. I, for one, like I'll name drop right now, I'm not a fan of, say, Ezra Levant. I cannot listen to him. It drives me crazy. But I have to know what's being said about me. I have to understand what's being said about my community. So occasionally, and not very often, occasionally I will read what he writes or I will watch what he does. And it does help me see what people are saying about our communities. Another step would be to communicate with editors, to communicate with producers, with reporters. Every newspaper or every television network does give contact information on their websites. So don't be afraid to like reach out to them and say, you know what, I have a problem with what you said. Or on the flip side, if they did a really great story that you appreciate, tell them, you know, like, I really like what you said. So thank you for that. And let's see more of that in the future. There's always all kinds of ways to get in touch with them. And that's really, really helpful. And that's going to help us in the future kind of take control of our narrative and, you know, be a part of what's being said about us. So I guess where I'd want to go next with this webinar would be to say, we have to start having more of an effect inside of the newsroom. So we need to start pitching stories about our communities. We need to start seeing stories that show minority communities in lights that are different than all the adjectives that I said before. So other than evil or backwards or uneducated. So if you're looking to pitch a story to a network or to a magazine, a newspaper, you've got to really know what you're pitching to and what kind of things they're looking for. So say you want to write a story for The Atlantic, or you want to write, let's go more local, like the London Free Press. Maybe you should look at what kind of things that they do in the past, what the reporter specialties are. So you really got to know what it is that you're looking for. You've got to tell them why it is that the story will benefit them. Journalism is not really all that ethical sometimes. You know what I mean? You've got to tell them that what you're doing is going to benefit them. So you got to tell them something as simple as, you know what, if you pitch this story, if you do this story, it'll help your viewership. So you need to kind of spin it in a way that'll really work on their part. And finally, you've always got to be persistent. Because editors, writers, producers, they're always on this fast schedule. The news schedule it's 24 hours, it's constantly going. So you've got to make sure that you're persistent if you really, really want it to happen. All right, so every newsroom in the world works on their own set of values. And in the journalism program, we're kind of taught like a list of news values that, that are kind of general, that they say most newsrooms function on. You know, we're told if it bleeds, it leads. So destruction and conflict are always the kind of things that make the top of the news run. Some of the values that we were told are things like conflict, timeliness, when did this thing happen? Proximity, how close did it happen? Oddity, you know, some stories that are really weird, like news organizations love, like I read this story about a German woman who wasn't able to graduate under the Nazi regime and just got her doctorate today. Like that's amazing. She was over 100, I believe. So stories like that are things that newsrooms really pick up on. Prominence, did it happen to someone famous? Like if I have to read another headline about the Kardashians, I think I'll cry. Or impact, you know, does this have an impact on a large group of people? So stories like that are things that really take off and things that newsrooms will pay attention to. So if you're looking to pitch something, that's always those are really great values to judge the stories on. And then also more things to consider when you want to pitch a story. Has the story been done before, or are you giving a new angle to it? Has anyone else covered it? What kind of things have been said about it, or who would make a good source? When you're writing a story, you always want to talk to people who are interesting, people who might not necessarily have not been asked about before. My friends and I joke that people are always talking about the Muslim woman, and people are always saying, like, you know, the war in Afghanistan, people were like, oh, we're going in to help the women who are being oppressed under the Taliban. But it's like, let's talk to a Muslim woman. Let's see how a Muslim woman like can speak for herself. So you always want to try to get that person who maybe was never given the opportunity to speak before, which is why something like this is so great, because I'm being given the opportunity to speak. So thank you. What are you trying to accomplish by writing this piece? Every piece has, you know, unfortunately, there's like an agenda there. So what is it that you're trying to get across through writing this piece? It doesn't necessarily have to be bad. It could be for a good reason. What bigger issues are attached to the story? What are you trying to say? I did a great piece earlier this year about Black History Month, and I was kind of trying to say that I wanted to see more Black Canadian history being taught in classrooms. But as a result of that, I talked to a lot of Black Canadians, and we kind of uncovered this bigger issue, which was that the Canadian identity is seen as the Great White North, and how that can be damaging to a lot of minority communities here in Canada. So it started off as a piece just about Black Canadian history, and I learned a lot of things that I didn't know, but at the same time, we were able to uncover a bigger issue that was there, and I feel that's what made the piece special to me. Sorry. Another thing that I feel might sometimes be overlooked is the power of social media. I don't know why a lot of people seem to think that if you're doing something on social media, it's not really real. And I agree to some level. You know, if you send out a tweet like #FreePalestine, that's not really going to save Palestine. You're going to have to do a little bit more than that. But at the same time, major news networks are now looking at hashtags. They are looking at what's trending online. Networks like BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, they all have, if not like sections of their news, they have the ticker, or they have something paying attention to hashtags that are trending. So this gives leeway to a lot of really powerful social movements. And it really does give power to young people who have a lot to say about what's going on in their communities. For example, If They Shot Me Down was a great one about after Mike Brown was shot, and the media started sharing this picture of him and made him look like a gang member, and he looked really scary. Young Black kids in the States started sharing two pictures, one of themselves at their graduations or at a dance looking very formal, and one of themselves where they're just like, you know, kicking back and chilling with their friends. And they were all asking, if they shot me down, which photo would the media share? And it opened up a really great discussion. Or Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter hashtag was a great thing that happened this year, and it really did start a lot of conversations online. Muslim apologies is one of my favorites because it mixes two of my favorite things, politics and sarcasm. And it allowed Muslims all over the world to kind of talk about how all Muslims have to apologize for the things that ISIS does. And at the same time, it was really funny. It was like, oh God, we're really sorry for coffee and algebra, you know? Or they would apologize for things that, you know, like hilariously, like, oh, we're really sorry for the Jonas Brothers. I don't know. So it does give way to a lot of important conversation. Or one that I discovered recently is Native Girls. So it's N, the number 8, V, girls, and it gives the spotlight to missing and murdered Indigenous women here in Canada, and it's very powerful. So things like that are educational tools, and they really do give leeway to a lot of great conversations, and the media does pay attention to them. But they have to trend. So try to keep up with those kind of things, and if you can make one of them go viral, it'll give a lot of attention to the kind of things that you're looking for. And another great thing about social media is that it allows for intersectionality. So it allows for causes between minority communities to kind of come together. One of my favorite ones was when the Dream Defenders this year, they went to Palestine. So let me start over. The Dream Defenders were they are a civil rights activist group that started as a result of the Trayvon Martin shooting almost wow, 4 years ago. And they started this civil rights group, and through social media, they made contact with youth in Palestine, and I think in the Gaza Strip also. And then this past December, they made a trip to Palestine and took to social media, and they posted pictures and they were tweeting out. And it was like this great meeting of two really powerful causes happening together. And that happened as a result of social media. And that was really beautiful to see. And that's how solidarity is done. That's how progress is made. So you cannot diminish the importance of these kinds of things. It can be really powerful. So there's a lot of intersectionality that happens, and again, a lot of really great conversations that happen over social media. So if you're feeling frustrated with the way that the media is portraying something, or you have something that you want to say about a certain cause, there are ways to do that, or to voice your opinions or your concerns over social media, and networks do notice these things. For example, there was a hashtag, My Name Is Not, which was young people with foreign sounding names tweeting with this hashtag My Name Is Not, and they were saying like how much difficulty people have in pronouncing their names, and how simple it should be to just get someone's name right. Or Solidarity is for White Women. It was discussing how the feminist movement sometimes puts precedence to the issues that quote unquote white women have, or the issues that women of color might have. And so again, it gives leeway to a lot of minority communities to discuss a much bigger issue. So those are some really powerful tools at our hands, and we should be able to utilize those for more than just Instagramming photos of us and our friends. And then again, you have to take all of that a step more. So say you've made all these connections on social media, you've tweeted out everything, you've gotten all this momentum. So you have to take it one step further, kind of like what the Dream Defenders did by actually flying to Palestine. They made all these connections over social media, and then they wanted to take it one step further. That trip to Palestine was all over the internet. It was blogged about, it was reported on, it was seen as like a really big deal. And because this group of young people went and took their connections from social media one step further. So like I said, social media can be seen as something really powerful, but you have to take the responsibility to go ahead and do one more thing. But from all of the things that I've seen online, it's pretty amazing. I mean, you just have to go out there and find it and get involved. So I guess to kind of sum up everything that I've been talking about, and this ownership, this responsibility, how can we take all of the stuff that I've just talked about and take it one step further? So you want to write a story, or you want to pitch a story about, say, the Indigenous community or the Muslim community or the Black community. What you've got to do really is get to know that community. I went to a whole bunch of events this past year for missing and murdered Indigenous women, because that's a cause that I've kind of gotten really passionate about. But I'm not an Indigenous person, and I cannot begin to understand that struggle or the pain that these families go through. Instead of writing anything, I went to a lot of these events just as a participant, just to listen, just to understand. So as a journalist, I found it important to know how these people wanted to be talked about, what kind of language they wanted to be used, what things that they were concerned about before I even wrote anything. And this is something that I feel a lot of us have a lot of trouble doing. We're incapable of just sitting and listening. And that might sound counterproductive, because I just spent the whole hour being like, oh, you have to go do something. But no, before you do anything, you need to get to know the community that you want to talk about. You need to get to know the community that wants to be represented. If it's your community, that's awesome, and go for it. But still, you need to understand at the beginning the roots of it all. So when you're there and you're in it, you've got to ask a lot of questions. You've got to really understand and get to know the people, get to know the problems. Like I said, get to know the language. And hopefully from there, you'll really be able to get a good sense of it, and hopefully understand where the misrepresentation has been happening. And then from there, you can start to fix that. You can start to build from that, and hopefully we'll see progress. Again, just to kind of sum up, if we don't do these things, who will? You know, we're going to see another generation of media or news being covered incorrectly. And it's frustrating to a lot of people. It's frustrating to me. That's why I got into this field in the first place. But our status quo will never change if we don't get involved. Just being able to wave it off and be like, oh, someone else will take care of it, that's not good enough anymore. You know, this is something that we should all kind of take ownership on. So I think that's kind of wrapping it up for me. Are there any questions yet?
Yeah, so we'll take questions from the YouTube page. But I guess I have a couple things that I'll jump in and intervene. I think it's interesting that you mentioned the incapacity that we have as people to listen, and it's even more interesting to think about that in the field of media, because media is seen as a space where people talk, but not a space where people listen to one another. And so, but one of my questions has to do with the idea of journalists not being part of a community, but reporting about a community. And what are sort of the ethical implications of that, and kind of going deeper, because on the one hand, I feel like if we take the situation, I mean, in the past year, the amount of reporting that's been done on violent extremism in the Muslim community, most of the people reporting have not been Muslims, or people that are not involved in the Muslim community. And so what is their role, and what is the relationship that they should have to the Muslim community that they're reporting to? And I think on the one hand, you'll have people who say, well, if they're part of the community, they lack objectivity. And then on the other hand, you'll have people who say, well, no, they don't have the nuance or the details. So would you be able to expand on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question, because that's definitely something that I faced this year. When my year started, almost like last May, my program started, I was like adamant. I was like, I'm going to cover Muslim issues. I'm going to change the perspective. Like, I basically went into my program thinking like, I'm going to single-handedly change the world, and people are going to love my religion and love my people. Everything's going to be fine. And I slowly began to realize that I'm part of the problem. Mostly because we do have a lot of issues. There are a lot of issues in our community that we do need to face. Growing violent extremism is something, that's something that we should be concerned about. And I would go to events and I would see people's expressions almost change when they would be like, oh, what, like, Assalamu alaikum, Sumaya, how's it going? And I'd say, oh, I'm here to cover this event. And they would put on a whole new face, and they would suddenly see me like I'm now part of the outside. I cannot, like, they would be on their guard around me because they were a little bit concerned, like, oh no, what is she gonna write? What is she gonna say? And it makes it difficult for me because I absolutely love my community, and I would never want to write something that could harm them in any way. But like I said earlier, our community has real problems and real conflicts, not even on a grand scale level, but there is like local drama, and when you're reporting on any like events or up and coming projects or anything like that, it puts me in a difficult position because it's my community and I love it. So why, like, I don't know how to report on that. It is very difficult. I guess a lot of journalists who are looking for that it leads mentality I don't think they would have a problem necessarily throwing their community under the bus, because these days the media is all about clickbait. It's about hits. It's about how many people are reading your article, how many times has it been shared. It's completely changed from the old media scene, which was like newspapers and radio and television. So you're always looking for that drama. I don't think someone who has that it leads mentality would have an issue throwing their community under the bus. But someone who's trying to approach journalism from maybe a more ethical standpoint and doesn't want to do that would probably be subjected to what I did to myself this year, which was move away from my community completely and kind of try not to, like, say there was an event in the Muslim community happening, I wouldn't necessarily want to cover it, just in case there was something negative happening and I didn't want to be the one to have to write about it. But I think after a while, it does become your responsibility to be honest about what's happening in your community. And you do have to be the one to you do have to be the one to face up to that. It is difficult, but if there are any problems happening in your community, I should be the one to write about it rather than someone else who might use harmful language or, take a quote out of context. For example, Sohaib Webb was in the London community recently, and he gave an hour-long talk to the MSA on the Muslim Students Association on campus. And the London Free Press did cover it, and a little bit of it was taken out of context, and a lot of people were very upset about that. And I was reading the article and I was thinking like, oh, someone from our community probably should have covered that. You know what I mean? It's a tricky thing, and it's a lot of internal conflict for sure. But I think with more time and more progress, if we have more seasoned journalists, we'll be able to cover our own events ethically and appropriately.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And I guess throwing it on kind of the opposite side, I think you're in an interesting position because you're kind of at the crossroads of being a journalist and being sort of a community member who deals with journalists. But kind of like looking at that crossroads and from that perspective, a lot of people that we work with have a lack of trust with journalists, and the article that you just mentioned, it's hard to trust a journalist who or a news agency who covers a story, and then you're reading it and you're saying that's not what happened. And so what would you recommend for young people that are saying, hey, I want to get engaged, I want to challenge stereotypes, but then maybe won't want to become journalists, but want to still be able to build a relationship with journalists? What is that relationship? How does it look like? And how do you build trust, or even can you build trust when they're not a member of your community?
I think there's a lot of really great ways to be engaged with the media that don't necessarily have to do with becoming a journalist. A great first step, honestly, is just becoming an engaged and active and educated member of the community. So if you're a high school student and you really want to, and you're like, I want to change the way that the world sees Muslims, a great way is to lead by example. I think you need to be educated. You have to present yourself well. You have to be an articulate person, because unfortunately you're going to be asked a lot of questions, and you're not a specialist. I mean, I've been asked questions about my faith and about the world that I'm not in any way equipped to deal with. When I was in high school and I had just moved to London, my teachers, I would come in the mornings and my teachers would be like, oh, Palestine and Israel, there was a shooting yesterday. What do you have to say about that? And I'd be like, oh, hold on, let me get my friend, the Palestinian ambassador, on the phone. Like, how could I possibly know that? So as young Muslim people, so that's who I'm speaking from their perspective, but other minorities, I'm sure face similar experiences. We're constantly being asked to represent an entire population of people that we can't possibly speak for. So the first way to be engaged and to create that relationship is to be comfortable speaking for yourself and to be articulate and be educated. Because then if you are at an event and there is a journalist, or you open up the paper and you see something that you know is incorrect, you will feel confident and comfortable enough to write up a letter to the editor, or to make a phone call, or to approach the journalist and say like, oh, I see you have a microphone. Can I give you a comment? And honestly, I know that's the most nerve-wracking thing, and it's very difficult. Like sometimes I'll see a reporter, and I'll be like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. For example, on campus after the Chapel Hill shootings, we had a vigil, and it was a very emotional night. And we saw reporters from CTV holding cameras and microphones and looking for people to interview. And I made a conscious effort to not be interviewed that night, because it was so much responsibility and it was such a heavy night, and I did not feel that I was in any position to give any kind of comment. So it's really hard, and you really have to be in control of what you say and the language that you use and any emotions that you might have. So that's a really good first step. be educated, be articulate, and that way, like, you'll be in control of the relationship as opposed to what you say and do being manipulated to support any kind of agenda or support any kind of pre-existing stereotype.
That's interesting that what you're mentioning, because we've seen a lot with especially young people who are thrown in the spotlight because, say, a member of a colleague or a friend has you know, done something that bleeds, and so they're now the leads. And I'm thinking a lot of the MSAs, the Muslim Student Associations,
Yeah.
were often thrown in the spotlight, and that don't necessarily have the basic understanding of, like, how do I prepare. So what would you recommend if an organization, a group of volunteers, a group of young people receive a phone call from a journalist and they say, hey, in an hour you're giving an interview on national television? What would you recommend are the steps they should take to conduct an interview?
Oh wow, an hour. That's really intense.
The reason I'm asking is because I've seen it happen where it's like news breaks, an institution is called, and you have an hour, 2 hours.
I've seen that happen as well. I was very involved with the Muslim Students Association when I was younger, when I was in my undergrad. And I was lucky enough to be on the exec board the year that the oil plant in Algeria was bombed. And it was a couple of students from London, Ontario, who were allegedly involved in that. And the MSA, our prayer room, was suddenly surrounded by journalists, and the president at the time was receiving all kinds of phone calls, and she was being interviewed by the Globe and Mail and the National Post. And we were literally, like, your scenario is like, I'm laughing because I have experienced it also. It's where a group of people who had nothing to do with it were suddenly called together and said, like, you're now asked to speak on behalf of every Muslim student in London, Ontario. So, like, what do you have to say for yourselves? Mm-hmm. Again, I think being educated and being aware of the situation was a very helpful thing, because we were all up to speed. We all knew what was going on. We all knew what they were talking about. I think also having a unified front is something that's very important. So to not, like, say I was interviewed and then another member of the exec board was interviewed, and if we both said two different things, or she had reacted in a way that was emotional or aggressive in any way, shape, or form, it would have been very detrimental to both of us, even if I had totally played it cool. So I think having a unified front is something that's really helpful. And again, I think maintaining your cool is something that a lot of people downplay. We're already seen as emotional or crazy or fiery, or however it is that you want to say. So to show young Muslims being cool and being articulate and being able to kind of control the attention that they're given is something that's really great and should not be shied away from. So that's definitely important. So if I was given an hour, myself and a group of students, I think we would come together. We would figure out how exactly we would want to approach the situation. We would be informed. We would be cool, and hopefully just, like, pray for the best, because that's an intense situation and it really wasn't fun. It really wasn't fun at all.
Mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. We had similar situations here in Ottawa, and I've heard stories across Canada. Another question that comes to mind, and it's kind of the counter to the title of this webinar. So we called it, the webinar, you called it Minority Media, and it's an interesting topic, because, as you mentioned earlier, the majority of people in the media are straight white men, right? And we're also in a position where we kind of, there's a need to work with the majority, and the majority still has I mean, if the majority is kind of establishing what goes on air and what doesn't, how do you see, what is, like, the importance of that relationship, and what is the role of the majority as allies, say, and what are some words that you could say, or recommendations that you can give to those who are part of the majority?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. It's really great, because I think how to be an ally is something that is very difficult for a lot of people. Not because they're doing it intentionally, like not because they want to cause any kind of harm to other communities, but because there's kind of like a haze, like they don't really see what it's like for the other or for other communities. For example, in oh God, I think it was Carleton. Okay, don't quote me, but there were a couple of journalism students who wanted to cover a racialization group. So the university hosts a group for students who feel like they've ever been subject to racialization, and they were able to kind of sit together in a circle in a forum and just share their experiences. It was supposed to be a safe space where they could just get together and talk about their experiences and support one another. And a couple of journalism students who were white asked if they could join the circle and cover what was being shared, and they were told that they couldn't do it.
It was Carleton.
It was Carleton. Okay. Yes. Okay. So as a result of that, there was all of this media frenzy, and it was like, this is reverse racism. This is going to stunt progress. This is not going to happen. And it led to a really heated discussion between myself and my classmates. I'm kind of scared that they're watching this, but I promise, guys, I love you, so I'm not gonna bash anyone right now. But the discussion got really heated because there were several students in my class who were among the naysayers. Like, they were just like, no, this is reverse racism. You know, I would be offended if I couldn't get into that group. I would sue, and they were really upset. And I was standing there. I was standing there and I was saying, I don't think that as the majority, you can appreciate what it's like to be a member of a minority group and sit in a room full of people who don't see your worldview. They might not necessarily support your worldview or support how you feel about it. And it's really difficult to always be that person challenging the majority's worldview. That's a really hard place. It can be emotionally draining. It can be very stressful. It's really difficult. And so a lot of my classmates were asking me, okay, but so what does that mean? Like, if I don't see your worldview, I'm not allowed to talk about it. I'm not allowed to attempt to see it. You know, if you got all these safe spaces, how are we ever going to understand one another? And it kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about just being able to listen. Before you come in and attempt to say that you do understand me, to say that you do see my worldview, you know, you've never lived a day in my shoes, but like, I've never lived a day in a lot of other people's shoes, you know, like it's all kind of, my worldview is limited to what I know and what I experience. And your worldview is limited to what you know and your experiences. So sometimes before you're able to cover anything, if you want to be an ally, you have to be able to listen and to say, like, I understand. Like I am not you, and your experiences are valid, and that is gonna have to be enough. So the first step, honestly, to being an ally and being someone who wants to cover minority issues and cover communities to which you do not belong, you have to be able to listen and you have to be able to understand. Kind of like when Solidarity is for White Women, when that hashtag was going viral, there were a lot of white feminists who were really offended by it because they were saying, you know, this is divisive. We should all be trying to work together. We should all, you know, this hashtag is detrimental to the feminist cause. But it's like, no, we're not trying to point fingers. And this moment is not a time for you to be defensive and upset. It's time for you to sit back and listen to the concerns and experiences of others. So before you're able to claim that you understand anyone else's worldview, you need to sit down and really listen. And sometimes you just have to say, like, I don't know what you're going through, but I'm willing to hear about it. I'm willing to sit back and listen, even if it makes me look bad. A really great example is when people talk about racism in the Muslim community. I'm very aware of my privilege inside the Muslim community because I'm Arab. You know, unfortunately, there is a premium put on Arab Muslims because there's a lot of racism within our community. So when someone discusses racism within the Muslim community, I always sit back and listen to what is being said because that's something that I'm never going to experience. And I'm trying to be an ally to my fellow Muslims who might be Black or might be, you know, Pakistani. And I want to try to understand what experiences they're having and try try to like understand that. So to be an ally, honestly, listening and understanding the language that is appropriate and should be used.
Mm-hmm. And so, do you have hope? Like, are you hopeful about the way our media is heading? And have you seen, since you've gotten interested in this and sort of observing the rise of social media and these hashtags, and even like the debate, I'm thinking of the Black Lives Matter versus the All Lives Matter, and
Yes.
and not in my name versus Muslim apologies, and you sort of have like a lot of debates going on, and they're happening online. But do you have hope that mainstream media picks up on this and starts realizing that there's a need to bring and showcase the stories of the unheard?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful.
So
Yeah.
what are you seeing? Like, what are there things that you're seeing, things that you're noticing?
Well, I'm seeing, first of all, a growing interest in members of the majority wanting to attend events in minority communities.
Mm-hmm.
There is a growing interest to understand. I mean, and that's because there have been a lot of conversations about like white privilege that are taking off on social media or in, pop culture. So people are beginning to acknowledge that that's something that exists. And they're able to kind of be like, okay, so I have this privilege, so I need to step outside of my bubble and see what exists beyond my worldview. And as that kind of thinking, I mean, there are people who still face friction in terms of acknowledging their own privilege, but I am, in my personal experiences, I am finding that that's becoming more widely accepted. And people are able to say, I have this privilege, so maybe I need to step out of my comfort zone and see what's going on. In my own life, I was in a class and I was the only Muslim, and I might have been the only hijabi that some of these, or the only like covered woman that these my classmates had ever like really spoken to, and I could see their worldviews shifting as a result of just getting to know me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that speaks volumes as to how important it is to be active and be articulate and try to be educated and involved, because you change people just by coming in contact with them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're able to live by example and you're able to, to be I hate using the term role model because that's a really hard thing to live up to, but be a good example for your faith and for your community, people will gravitate towards you and people will ask you more questions, and it'll be easier to kind of shut down stereotypes that way.
Mm-hmm.
But there is like a growing curiosity. Also because I think our generation has learned to be a little bit more critical about what they hear and what they read in the media in the first place. Being told that there are weapons of mass destruction and then, oops, sorry, we were just kidding. It has an impact on how you see the news and what is being told by politicians or anchors and such. So there is definitely, as this growing culture of like critical thinking grows, there's also a culture of curiosity and understanding and intersectionality, as I was talking about earlier. So I definitely have hope. I've met a lot of incredible people who are members of the majority, who are white students who just are trying to make good in the world just like I am. And for example, when Charlie Hebdo happened, when the shooting happened in Paris,
Mm-hmm.
a really good friend Facebook messaged me, and he was telling me that he was really upset that the Muslim communities in France weren't being protected by police as much as the Jewish communities in France were being protected. And it was like the most touching text message I ever got, because he was like, I don't understand. The Muslims are going to get attacked as a result of these shootings. The violence towards Muslim communities are going to grow. Why isn't anyone doing anything about this? And he was so concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really moving moment. And it was like, it really did give me hope. It kind of showed me that like people are beginning to have their worldviews shifted, and they are beginning to understand that world events work in ways that, are not always being shown accurately.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, it was a really powerful moment for me. So yeah, to answer your question, I definitely have hope. And I think things are moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I mean, it's incredibly challenging to portray nuance, right? And to put nuance in a story, because I guess the like you said, I really like the idea of when it bleeds, it leads, because blood is black and white, right? It's
Yeah.
good versus evil, and we have a hard time seeing those nuances. But it seems like what you're saying with things like social media, with things with kind of wanting to dig deeper, we're getting more nuance, and we're starting to see that there's always a bigger picture, and hopefully we go beyond some of the injustices and the stereotypes that are portrayed in the media. So to kind of close with that, is there any other thoughts that you'd like to share with folks?
Other thoughts.
That's a big question.
I'm thinking, I'm kind of in my head right now, I'm just thinking about, honestly, like this past year was an incredibly momentous year for me. And I got to meet a lot of amazing people, and I got to cover a lot of things that were really important to me. And I really did kind of push the boundaries of my comfort zone, and I got to experience a lot of things that I didn't think I would be able to. And so I think my closing thoughts would be that it's all possible. Sometimes you are living in this world and you just kind of feel like it's all set in stone. You feel hopeless. I mean, I think the best example of that is after the Chapel Hill shootings. I wasn't able to go to class just because I felt incredibly alone. I just felt like I just woke up that morning and I just felt like there was nothing I could do or say that would change where we had gotten as a civilization. I just felt very exhausted. Mm-hmm. But I was looking, but I did get up and I did keep going, and it changed. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was able to see people take action, and I was able to see our communities kind of shake themselves off from this really devastating event and keep going. I saw people who had no interest in Muslim events or how Muslims were being covered in the media or anything, read about these 3 kids and just be completely blown away and decide that their worldview was wrong, and that they had to work harder to educate themselves and to change the direction that we were going. And it was just like, I'm having a hard time putting it into words. Mm-hmm. There's always hope. And the first step to that is getting up and doing it yourself. And so I was unable to go to class that day, but after that day, I never missed class. I was always the first one there. I was always the first one doing my assignments. I was always going, always meeting new people, always trying new things. Because the only way that change is going to happen is if we do it, is if we feel the responsibility to change the world ourselves. And that sounds really cliche, and I hate that I just said that. But you have to feel that responsibility, because when else are you going to have this energy and have this time and have these resources, you know? I'm going to blink and be 40 before I know it. And if the world is exactly where it is right now, then I would have failed, you know? Mm-hmm. So we've got to take advantage of our youth. We've got to take advantage of our energy and our effort, our time, our resources. We've got to do it. And there are a million different ways to get involved and get engaged. And I really encourage everyone to do that, to look into it, to pick up their newspaper, to scroll through their news feed. You know, the news is everywhere, and it's our responsibility, because we're going to be asked what we did with all of this time. So those are my thoughts. They're kind of all jumbled up right now because so many things happened, but alhamdulillah, those are my thoughts.
Great. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to sharing your thoughts and to sharing some practical tips and ways to get engaged with the media. And I hope that we can continue working together. I mean, it's really interesting, because working nationally and working in Canada and North America, it's such a huge is such a huge piece of land that it's so hard to connect from West Coast to East Coast and to try to get mobilized and to do some action. But we're seeing with the rise of social media and with the rise of with the rise of just this interconnectedness, we're able to actually create a lot of change, and I'm really inspired with what you said. And if anybody else has any quick questions, we have 5 minutes, and if not, we'll close here. So I just wanted to thank you very much. Oh, can this be? Someone's asking to have a weekly podcast. I'll have to see if we can do this.
You're gonna listen to me ramble weekly?
Yeah, we could just have community members from across the country. We could call them the Rambling On or something like that. Cool. So yeah, on behalf of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, and I want to thank you very much, and I really hope the best for you, and especially good luck on getting a good position within the mainstream media, because your voice is very valuable, and it's definitely going to help out to reshape the narrative of communities that you're working with. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.